Hello, I'm Kim Sauer at What's New in Electronics in the What's New in Electronics TV studio. Today we're going to be discussing the future needs of the global manufacturing industry, and I've got a great panel with me today. Welcome to the debate. I've got Michael Ford from Mentor Graphics, Peter Towler, OSI, and Keith Bryant, who is from the Smart Group, representing the Smart Group today. Welcome again. So, global electronics manufacturing industry and the future. What are the specific technology needs that are required? Let's start off with just defining where we're at today.
For those companies who are manufacturing internationally, they will be companies who have different sites in different areas of the world, whether they're OEMs or EMS companies. And they will have different capabilities at those sites. They will have different opportunities, different capacity requirements. And so, there are decisions to be made. Where should I make a particular product that's going to be the best? Now, always that has been a problem because, you look at capacity planning or you look at what the customer needs. Now, however, we've got technology, such as the data in the cloud, where we can have taken information about the live environment from different factories that are currently working, and we can make very fast decisions about how to allocate products. Okay, physical materials still need to be there, but there are changes that are really coming in now to enable this kind of decision-making process to be accelerated. And that's going to create a kind of a revolution in itself, in that the approach to global manufacturing is going to be much more dynamic than it's been in the past.
I'd agree with that. OSI runs manufacturing plants in the UK and in Indonesia and Malaysia, as well as the USA. And it's the same old story, where anything that we develop here will be prototyped first, it'll change into a different form to go into field trials, and then what you make offshore in volume will be an entirely different animal. You will be redesigning it for different manufacturing technologies. Now, which leads which? Well, the answer is whichever one is most cost effective in the environment you're going to make it in. So, we've got wire bonding offshore, we could do chip on board version of something which was done as a trial product here, but it's the same functionality.
So really driven by cost, therefore, ultimately, at the moment, at this stage.
Oh, for sure. I mean, cost is becoming a bigger and bigger driver in everything that we do. Whether it's improving yield, which reduces costs, speeding up time to market, which reduces cost, flexibility of your manufacturing line in terms of zero downtime on changeovers, flexibility of your plants to manufacture different, let's say, levels of technology as well as different volumes, and also manufacturing sites nearer the sites where the products are actually going to be used. Yeah. So we're seeing more and more of what we would call, like, I prefer to call it nearshoring than onshoring, because basically it comes to the lowest cost manufacturing base close to where the big users of whatever you're making are.
I agree, but I think it's not only cost. I mean, a little while ago we used to ask questions in a rather flippant way about, do you think there's going to be a World War III? Now it's kind of when and where is going to be the World War III? We see tensions in different areas of the world, which is going to create issues of supply chain. People, even governments, are dependent on resources that are coming from offshore locations. For example, computers to the US. That if there was a kind of problem, even a small problem in the world, it's going to have a great effect. So you've got to balance in the cost, but also the risk, because you've got to be able to ensure that you can get critical product into a country for the whole infrastructure of the country to work. And this is something that's becoming much more important, I think.
Yeah, I suppose that's a very valid point, especially if we look at rare earth materials that are mined in Africa and basically now completely owned by the Chinese.
Yeah.
If we want to look at it at that level, then yes, there are a whole lot of things to worry about. But being a simple engineer, I tend to look a little bit more at what we do. And I mean, cost becomes a bigger issue, but it's not necessarily the end price. It's the efficiency of the manufacturing of the product. And that efficiency includes downtime, quality, and everything else. Because, okay, maybe cost is the wrong word. Let's say value chain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. because you want to make something that's as low a cost as you can make it, to be as reliable as you can make it for the length of time you need it to work. And that's probably a better way of explaining the simple word of cost.
You see, there's a variety of different ways that we can do manufacture in this country. And as you said, the lowest cost and the best value proposition sometimes can be to leave material out of the downstream supply chain ready for the customer, and keep, as we do for some of our customers, keep part-built units which we can then complete into 1 or 2 or 3 variants at short notice. So there's actually very little stock in the chain of finished product and finished goods and the higher value end of where you are on the manufacturing chain. It's not filling warehouses, it's sitting further back in our system, ready to complete in, shall we say, a week, instead of the 6 to 8 weeks it might take to make it from scratch.
That's a really important point, actually, because the kind of cost savings that you can get from the distribution chain, doing things as you said. I mean, Apple, they're on record as saying that their manufacturing cost in China for their products is like 1% of the final cost of the product. I mean, come on, 1%? And we're talking about how efficient we do it in manufacturing. It's insignificant. It doesn't matter. You could actually pay people 10 times more to do the same job in the UK as they do today in China, and it wouldn't have a very big impact on the product price itself. However, you take the cost out of the distribution chain, and you've just made a much bigger dent in that cost. So that you're finding that there are business models now that if you consider the whole product life cycle from end to end, you end up with a lower net cost doing things near shore or even onshore. And the way to do it is exactly as you said.
So in order to be able to manage that complexity of a supply chain, taking risk into consideration, taking materials management, etc., into consideration, the margins and everything else, the people that are involved in it, how do we need to adapt our way of manufacturing? Do we need to adapt the way of manufacturing in order to be set up for the future needs and some sort of impacts that it may have on the customer demands? Because that's ultimately who's driving what we manufacture.
The most pertinent thing, if you like, to getting that flexibility, which is excuse me, the most pertinent thing to getting that level of local flexibility going is the customer-facing side of your organisation, having the resources to then kick off a sales order internally to produce that product efficiently and quickly with no questions being asked. So the engineering side of it has to answer all the questions first and leave a clean package ready to manufacture fairly quickly straight through the factory. How do you do that with offshore? Well, you'd have a job, because you'd have to actually go much more build to print and supply all the questions answered in a package with a time scale to manufacture it, and then it's immovable. The way we do things more locally is much more communication. Really is the key. Communication and flexibility in your manufacture will produce the results for the customer.
Yeah, I think design also has a big part to play in this. I mean, I was at in fact 3 mobile manufacturing plants in Asia a few weeks ago, and they were making same phone, 16 gigabyte, 32 gigabyte, 64, and 128. And they had a BGA, and they had a package-on-package BGA. And the only difference in those phones was the top chip. Everything else was exactly the same. But the memory was in that one chip, and depending on which chip they loaded, depended on which level of phone they sold. And they could change that depending on the forecasts that their sales guys were giving them, and their sales guys were selling to the shops and the network providers. So they were getting a forecast of, we need so many of this, so many of that, and they were actually tweaking them online to produce what they were doing to forecast. But again, if the design had been 4 completely different phones for 4 completely different outlets with different, let's say, different quality of camera, different quality of this, different quality of that, then they'd have had 4 huge production lines, whereas they just had 1.
But we've got to put this into context, because in days gone by, people would, if they liked a product, they would start buying more of it. And, the big companies, they knew that they spend $1 million on advertising, they can increase 1% of their market share. So it was really, really simple to manage. Today, it's completely out of control, because one tweet can ruin the life of a product. And the kind of volatility that you see then from the retail or the business to business back to the manufacturing, it's just varying, is almost out of control. And the systems like ERP and even business intelligence, they can't predict who's going to tweet what. And so factories and businesses and their design have to be prepared for that. And this kind of technique, as you described, is good to do that. But this idea, this kind of concept needs to be built in to every stage of manufacturing and design and distribution.
Time was, if you go back 15 years, I remember having conversations with potential customers where they had an idea to have a selection of robotic machines which could build virtually anything, rather like 3D printing, but 3D electronics, if you like, with almost anything being specified. Now, you have got techniques like on-the-roll direct writing of inkjet printing of palladium catalyst, so you can plate flexible circuits with no tooling. Therefore, you can make one off with that just by changing a program. But the actual reality of this concept people had doesn't seem to have arrived, and you can see why. So the flexibility is more in the designing it to be flexible for this sort of manufacturing route that we're talking about here with the Apple chips and the sort of things that we do currently. That really seems to be a much more practical reality than creation of a system which is entirely flexible and can make anything. That's a pie in the sky so far.
We can't talk about the future of manufacturing without touching on the key subjects of Industry 4.0, IIoT, IOM, all those buzzwords that people are talking about, however one defines them. So let's touch on that. And again, from a global standpoint, what are the developments going on a factory level, and how does it influence the way we're producing electronics today?
It's about the visibility and control and being able to do things that people used to do, you know, like, for example, managers who are trying to do a production plan, who need to take a lot of inputs from various different departments within manufacturing, and they need to make decisions. Those decisions happened over days or even weeks sometimes, a lot of phone calls and meetings. Now decisions need to be made a lot faster. And when we're switching variants or when we need to adjust the production to suit a different demand from the customer, we don't want to build stock in the distribution chain. So we've got to change what we do. But, you know, the traditional approach is that, you know, there was one company in Europe, they were a high volume producer. And they were then told that they have to become high mix because that's the way the market was going. But no reduction of productivity. And they just thought, right, time to look for a new job, because that's not going to happen. But it can happen, and this is where Industry 4.0 comes along, because it's not just about the gathering of the data, it's then what do you do with it? Do you have intelligent computerizations that then are an assistance or even a decision maker toward making the factory the flexibility it needs to be able to respond efficiently to different customer needs? So this whole technology is coming along, and it's, you know, not just on a line or in a machine or in a whole factory, it's actually linking the different factories together, as we started with about planning, capacity plan globally. So this is a revolution actually, because it's a revolution in time. Instead of taking days and weeks, it's now taking seconds or minutes.
And it's software helping the whole process and helping the people within the process as well.
Yeah, I mean, the key starting point, at least if we look at the manufacturing level, is the ability now that we have to inspect online, to get real-time results, and also the intelligence that we have into some of our equipment. You know, we have now pick-and-place machines where the operator scans the barcode of the reel that he loads, and an alarm goes off if the wrong one is loaded. They're now loading, effectively they're preloading machines by loading all the rails, and then you just slide one out, slide one in, and your first board is a good one, and it comes pretty much straight out of the machine. All of these things are helping the productivity, they're helping the yield, they're helping the flexibility. And the feedback data now, in a lot of cases, if you look at the AOI, you look at the SPI, you look at all of those machines, you're getting real-time feedback about what's happening within your process window. And I was, again, talking to a couple of people about it, and they said the thing that they really like now is that they can work within the process window. It used to be an alarm went off when something was outside the process window. In other words, it's scrap. And now what they find is that they're getting more accurate feedback from their equipment, and they're able to make adjustments within that window, which means everything that comes out the end of the line is good. You know, we all know the perfect board doesn't exist, because if you look at anything long enough, you'll find something wrong with it. But if it's fit for purpose and meets the specifications, then as far as I'm concerned and the world should be concerned, it's a good board. And the Industry 4.0 is helping with that, in that it's linking the management information systems, and it's helping the line, because when a reel is loaded, it's checking what's in the stores, and if there aren't enough in the stores, then it's reordering, and it's doing all of this kind of stuff, and it's taking out, you know, I'm not a Luddite, but I don't want to see the human interaction with a production line go, because I think when there is a fault or a defect or something that needs tuning within the line, it's still best that a person makes the decision of what to do. But in terms of people placing orders for repeat stuff, scheduling maintenance on machines and all of these things, taking the human error out of that, I think is a really, really big step. But when I talk to some people, they say, well, you know, I want 5 production lines, and I just want one person looking at a management information screen and not actually doing anything to touch all of those lines. You know, for me, personally, it's a step too far, because you still need that human interaction, maybe one person per 2 lines who's, you know, in control, rather than letting the machines take over.
I would add to that what you're talking about with one person looking after 5 machines, fine if you're making the same product all the time, that's great. That's not the reality now. That might have been 20 years ago in some of the Welsh and the Scottish factories that no longer exist over here, but life ain't like that now. It's the high mix, and you can't do that with high mix, so fundamentally you have to operate in the way that you're saying, with the on-the-spot interaction.
I'd just like to add to that. I mean, a lot of the issues around that point are to do with the fact that information cannot be depended upon. You need that human person there to make a sanity check. As we go forward with IoT, we are getting better quality of information. Now, I'm not saying create a lights-out factory where everything is completely automated. That's not going to happen for any time soon. But at least get the information on a level playing field, something that's normalized into a single language, so that you can start to put into perspective things that happen. That is an aid to the people making the decisions. As time goes on, you're going to realize that the information is more and more dependable. So you could actually introduce Industry 4.0 solutions. These can be created by machine vendors, they can be created by solution providers, and they all are designed then to work with each other. You then start to build your smart element of your smart factory, and you then require less and less people on the shop floor. You still then need people to start to tell the automations what to do, what are the limits, what are the guidelines. So you see the kind of people's role ascending upwards in terms of how interesting their job is, what kind of level of engineering they're bringing to the operation. And at the same time, you're seeing automation creep in to areas that previously were done by people. So this is not something that you can turn on immediately. You can turn on the data collection. You can turn on the normalization. You can start to share the data, put it into the cloud, whatever you want to do. And then the real work starts, which is to replace those jobs that can be replaced once you have confidence.
Certainly lots of developments happening on that side towards the smart factory, towards that cost-effective, flexible process in the end that gives us, the consumer, the products that we need. Thank you very much for your participation today. It was great fun, very interesting subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.